I'm really excited about this next bit of the program because one of the things we felt was really important from the beginning is we wanted DARIAH is a research infrastructure for the arts and humanities, and we wanted to have something that came from the arts, because the whole idea of presence, of liveness, of being in space is something that our colleagues in arts research know better than any. And so I'm seeing my co-host here, Courtney Grile, who is a PhD student in Trinity College Dublin, coming from an arts practice background and a theater practitioner. Courtney, do you want to kind of kick it off just by telling us sort of, what the idea was and what your thought process was of how you responded to this challenge? We said, we're having a virtual meeting. We don't know what virtual meetings are doing. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I was so delighted to get your email, and that was kind of saying, we're doing this event and we're interested in knowing how you work in drama and theater, and how that might change, if it were moved into an online setting versus the physical presence. And we also talked about how, you were wanting the exchange to be really engaging, because my first response was, oh, I can write you up something. No problem.
I was like, ah!
Kind of like, well, how can we make it more engaging? And so I thought, it's fair enough. The one thing I say to my students over and over again is show me, don't tell me. Because a lot of times 8-year-olds will be like, I'm a dog. And I'm like, I don't believe you, because you're standing on 2 legs and you're just telling me you're a dog. Show me that you're a dog, right? How would you do that? So I'm always telling my students, show me, don't tell me. So I started to challenge myself in that way. And I thought, oh, it would be so great if I could share a piece of the work that we do that's live and in person. And luckily, I had some video footage, and I had the ability to get permission to use that footage. And then I thought, okay, so I can share what we do live. You can kind of sense it and see it. Wouldn't it be cool if we tried to do the same thing, but through Zoom? Because then we could really talk about some of the differences, and could also play a little bit, which is always quite fun. Kind of what we're doing today, And so luckily, everyone else was on quarantine and things lined up, and we were able to get a lot of the group from the initial project, which was about almost 10 years ago, together in a Zoom meeting to try and replicate some of these exercises. And what you see in the Prezi that I made is just one exercise, but we actually did several. Which were really funny. I don't know if you noticed, there's in the reflection, we're all wearing stickers. Some of us we did poorly at a game that required us to put stickers on. So it was really fun and really challenging. But yeah, that was that idea of show me, don't tell me. And that is really what we try to do, I think, in all arts, right? That there are some things that speech, there's no words for, right?
Yeah.
And so art.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, if anybody hasn't seen or didn't notice in the exhibition where the Prezi is that Courtney put together, it's very, very rich. And you really do get the chance to walk through these people with the physical exercise and the virtual exercise. And it's fascinating to watch the differences again. And it really does show rather than tell. But so from your perspective, having done the same exercise 10 years apart, for physical space and virtual space, what do you think? I mean, what struck you as being the good and the bad about the two? I mean, what was the differences?
The biggest difference for me was the embodiment and the connection to other bodies in space. So much information is wrought through our bodies and positioning in relation to other bodies, including levels and direction and nuances in sound, right? Is it soft and gentle? Is it quiet? Is it loud and piercing? That really added to the physically present versions. In the Zoom machines, that felt like there was a disconnect of the bodies. One of the participants in the reflection spoke about how each part of the machine, on one hand, was really positive. It was intensely personal. But then we kind of had like a disparate kind of intensely personal things that we were trying to put together to make one cohesive machine, if that makes sense. So when you do that exercise in the physical presence, you're still allowed to contribute your individual piece that you're contributing, but it's in the context of what's come before it and what's happening around it. And so it becomes more of a group effort with each individual contributing but towards something that they're working on together. Whereas online, it was harder to make those connections. And, they even said, to position yourself in relation to someone. So there was in the hate machine, one of the participants wanted to say stop. And she said, had she been there in person, she would have stood in front of him and said, stop, stop. And that would have informed us in a different way than it informed us on the screen. Another participant spoke about it feeling more turn-based, which is really interesting because obviously when we're in person, we take turns, but it kind of happens organically in a way that in a Zoom meeting, and we've all seen that even in the breakout sessions here, where it's like, and the little yellow thing that highlights the screen is bouncing around, telling us who to look at. So it feels like the burden of more turn-based, but some things that were a little different was that because everyone was in a space that was comfortable for them, because they were in their own space, there was the possibility that people felt a little further removed from judgment, and that they could be a little more unique to who they are because they were in their space surrounded by their things. But then there's also the conversation of space and being that when you come together in a specific place for a specific purpose in this room, maybe it's not always for this purpose, but we're using it for this purpose right now. And what is the history and the background of that room, and what weight does that room carry? What rich material exists in that space? It's like when you go onto Trinity campus, that is a different experience, right? Than going into a different campus, right? So it carries with it a history, it carries with it something that we bring with it. So I think space and place, there were gains on both sides, I think. I think it would depend on what it is that you're trying to do, right? So being more specific in that the Zoom might function better for a specific purpose and the in-person in that regard.
Yeah. Great. And it's interesting because, one of the things that, we've talked about this, and one of the things that struck me is that, and we talked about the whole idea of the sort of the productive chaos, and that you can have a productive chaos or you can have an unproductive chaos. And I want to say a couple of words about that. Again, because that maps to what we think about as this kind of serendipity and the unexpected. But I think you had a really good sort of sensitivity to that. Yeah.
So the idea of productive chaos, in our workshops and our settings, and I would argue to say even in meetings that I've had, even at the hub, sometimes chatter breaks out and something will happen, or there'll be laughter, there'll be something going on that wasn't expected. So a moment of chaos, but it always tends to be in service of either what is being thought about in the room, or in service of the people, in that maybe they just needed a giggle break. Like that's an indicator, right? If things kind of break down, that, what, we've been going for an hour, maybe they need a break, right? Maybe that's the time for it. Whereas the chaos that happens in the Zoom meeting is usually technical. It's usually because of technical reasons. And then on top of that, like, even if we have technical chaos, at a conference live, we experience that together. So we can kind of chuckle, technology, we're all together and we can laugh together. Whereas when it happens in the Zoom room, we're frustrated because we're alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so whether it's the sound popping because of the prioritization or our own connection breaking up, we feel alone.
Yeah.
Rather than,
I'm just gonna say that the whole construction of us and them is changed.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of thems and not a lot of us.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. And I think this relates also to something you were saying about power and the power. And this came up, I mentioned this already when we were kind of just chatting over tea, but please talk a little bit about that. Because again, it was interesting that you were so sensitive to that. I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. So, for me, the power dynamics, I mean, obviously when I'm facilitating a room, usually, not always, participants will kind of, defer to me a little bit. And when I ask, for attention, that, they'll give it to me. But it is always in the service of I am trying to create a space where people feel comfortable sharing and talking and creating dialogue. So it's very rare that I would like shush someone or stop them from talking. And so when I came into the Zoom room and I was getting ready for the workshop and looking at all the tools, and trying to figure out how to get people's attention, which can be harder, because in the room I can kind of, you know, wait patiently. I can hold up my hand. I can do various different tactics until everyone comes around. But that's not possible on Zoom because perhaps someone's room is making more noise than my room is. So I might not ever get heard. And there was this idea of like, well, you can mute everybody. And it just seemed like if I'm trying to create a space in which people feel comfortable talking and sharing dialogue, that the idea of me coming in like as a godlike person and muting people, I wouldn't do that in real life, right? So that's why we came up with the idea of screen sharing the freeze. And people can choose to self-mute. They can choose to stop talking. They can choose to put their own machines on mute to give the focus, in the same way that live, you know, people choose to stop talking and to look, right? We look, we give our attention to where the attention should go. And it's hard to do that in this space. It's hard to, you know, look at the speaker.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting because that brings up one of the moments that I loved in one of the wrap-up sessions, which is where you were talking about eye contact. And it's one of these kind of really, there was a number of specific technical barriers you talked about that I thought actually, you know, we should feed these back to Zoom because they should know that these are barriers. But do you want to just describe that moment of the eye contact? Because I just thought it was brilliant for people who haven't seen it.
Well, we had all talked about, I think it was Krista, my colleague Krista, that brought up, you know, eye contact, and we can't look at each other. And if we want to look like we're making eye contact, we have to look up at our camera, and then we're not looking at the screen. And so we decided to have a shared moment of eye contact all together. And I counted to 3 and we all looked up into our camera. So there's a moment on the Zoom where we're all, it looks like we're looking at each other and we're not actually at all. But it was
then you got to sit afterwards and you got to receive the eye contact kind of later.
Yes to go back to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and again, you know, anybody who's interested in this kind of thing, I highly recommend sort of watching through the various bits. A bit that I stole from you was the taking of the breaths at the beginning, and I think it's important for you to talk about why you did that in your experiment. And how that worked and what you felt, what effect you felt that had on the experiment when you did it in the virtual space.
Well, I mean, breathwork would be something that, again, it's a tool that we would use even when we're working in person, because even when we are physically present, you know, we all still carry our lives into rooms with us. And so one of the things that we try to do when we're warming up is we try to have people be physically as present in the room as possible. So sometimes, you know, we hold hands and we send a pulse around, and sometimes we breathe and we might hold hands, and I just kind of go, let's inhale, and we inhale together, exhale, and we exhale together. And we might do that 2 or 3 times to kind of ground us. And so when we were getting ready for the workshop, I thought, let's try as best we can to bring ourselves together. And it was really effective for the group that I worked with. I kind of sensed that they would be a little more open to it, as they had experienced it with me before in person. They were all theater artists as well. So, but it helped to bring us together. It helped to feel like we might, for at least a short moment, we were breathing as one, despite the fact that we were spread out across 8 time zones. Which was kind of lovely, and I found it to be really effective. I would continue.
And it does remind me of some of what, you know, again, if you think about the Tarkle work that I was thinking of earlier, there is a kind of an openness and a vulnerability that we manage through technology. And I felt that some of the most amazing moments in the various videos were when people were kind of pushing against the technology in order to recuperate that vulnerability. Yeah. Excellent.
And there's always things we can't control. And so I think human nature will always find a way to try and sneak through.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's, I mean, one of the, in the last wrap up video, you were talking about how this could be a place, you know, again, we were talking about how this is sort of, you know, this whole event is sort of a grief response. It's a mourning reaction to all that we feel that we have lost over the past few months. And let's all hope we get it back, at least the things we need most. But the whole idea that this is a chance to, be more open, be more inclusive, develop new vocabularies, develop new art forms. I don't know if you want to say, just kind of as a final word, anything about those opportunities and how you sort of felt about the positivity, the possibilities in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I have been converted in a way. I'm a very big champion of live physical presence. I think it's invaluable, but the possibility for other forms, and I think that's the idea, is we can't keep with the mentality of substituting, but to be open to new forms and to be open to new ways that might not check all the same boxes, but they check different boxes and they accomplish different things, and that a new art form could grow out of this is also quite exciting. I will say too, you guys didn't get to see this when we created a coronavirus machine. And you talk about those incidental moments, but the machine, it was actually really neat. I'm happy to share it. But there was a moment where somebody was doing their motion and their dog came up and like attacked them, which was so lovely, but it was also, it was a coronavirus machine. Because if we had tried to create a coronavirus machine physically in person, there wouldn't have been that moment with the puppy jumping up. And yet that is such an experience of being in quarantine and you know, having,
and yeah,
it was amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, this is, you know, I think that's one of the, would it be one of the kindest metaphors I can think of for what we've all been going through, is that you know, a puppy has just come up and knocked us over and, you know, licked our face, you know, bodily fluids and all that. But it does kind of remind us that for all of our best laid plans, we need to be kind of open to the fact that they may change because we don't control everything. So we just have to kind of hang together and be interdependent and be connected.
Which is something that we have to be when we're in person as well, you know, like to work, especially to work the way that we work in theater and drama. But I think in everyday life and everything that everyone does, I'm assuming you've got to be flexible. And so you've got to bring that flexibility into the space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the work you did. I would encourage anyone who has a question for Courtney in particular to put it in the chat. And I'd encourage you, Courtney, just to keep an eye on the chat for the next few minutes to see if there's anybody who has any questions. Check out her work in the exhibition space. And again, it's been inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things this is one of the other things that drives me crazy is at the end of somebody's presentation, you don't get it. So, you know, here is the oral feedback of appreciation. And I see various hands going up as well.